Hello. I worked as an ordinary office clerk in a small town in the Midwest. My life was steady and predictable. 15 years of marriage, a 9 to 5 job, a cozy house, and a little son who played soccer on the weekends. But everything changed when a group of refugees from Ukraine arrived in our town. One sunny day, I went into a cafe where, in the corner, she was sitting, a tall, slender blonde with red lips, like a movie star. Her name was Katya. I noticed how she talked to other refugees, laughing and sharing her stories. I felt my heart start to beat faster. She was completely different, full of life and energy. Every time I saw her, I couldn't look away. There was a mystery in her eyes, a mystery I realized I had been missing in my everyday life. I started dreaming about her, how she smiled, how she spoke, how she simply sat and sipped her coffee. These thoughts became my secret solace, even though I knew it was wrong. Day by day, I kept going to the cafe, hoping to catch her eye. And one day, our eyes met. I felt something click inside of me. She smiled, and I knew at that moment I was powerless to resist. Every day spent seeing her only intensified my attraction. I realized this might lead to something more, and that scared me. The inner conflict began to eat me alive. How could I be falling for another woman when I had a wife and son? I loved my family, but this blonde with the red lips started occupying my thoughts more and more. I understood that I wanted to be closer to her, even if it meant putting everything I had at risk. My life began to change. Inside, a storm raged, demanding resolution. But how could I resist falling into this whirlpool of emotions? Questions without answers swirled in my head, and every day it became harder to keep myself in check. One evening, sitting in the cafe, I watched her laugh, and suddenly I realized I was ready to risk everything for her. This was only the beginning. Every day, I felt my attraction to Katya growing stronger. She filled my thoughts like light fills a dark room. I started noticing that the things which once brought me joy no longer excited me. Walks with my son, evenings with my wife. All of it seemed dull compared to the image of Katya. I often caught myself comparing her to my wife. Katya was real, free, full of life. There was no routine about her, no monotony that swallowed me whole. She laughed like every moment was a gift, and I dreamed of becoming part of her world. I could no longer hide from myself that it was her I wanted, and that terrified me. One day, when I came to the cafe, I saw her sitting alone. She had a cup of coffee, lost in thought. I made up my mind to approach her. It was like a magnetic force pulled me toward her, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't turn back. We started talking. With each passing day, my meetings with Katya became more frequent, and these moments turned into my true escape from the daily grind. We didn't just meet in the cafe anymore. We started taking walks in the park. I loved listening to her talk about her life in Ukraine, her family, her dreams of a new beginning. Her story was filled with hope, and that inspired me. One day, while we were walking by the pond, the sun was setting, and golden rays reflected off the water, creating a magical atmosphere. We talked about what family meant to each of us. I noticed how her eyes sparkled when she shared her dreams, and I felt something between us shift. We began to open up more, sharing our deeper thoughts, dreams, and hopes. The time I spent with Katya became more intimate. After a long pause, we stopped at a quiet spot by the water. I felt her hand brush against mine, and a pulse of electricity ran through me. Without thinking, I turned to her, and before I knew it, we were closer than ever before. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin. My heart pounded as her lips hovered just inches from mine. Suddenly, the space between us vanished. Her soft lips met mine, sending a shock of desire through my body. The kiss was slow, full of a passion we had both been holding back for so long. I pulled her closer, my hands finding the curve of her waist, her body fitting perfectly against mine. It was as if nothing else in the world mattered in that moment except for us. Katya's fingers trailed up the back of my neck, tangling in my hair as the kiss deepened. I could feel her heart beating fast, matching the intensity of my own. As we stumbled into the shadows, our hands explored each other's bodies, the tension between us finally giving way to raw desire. I pushed her gently against the tree, her back arching as my lips moved down to her neck. She let out a soft moan, sending waves of heat through me. For a long time, we were lost in each other. Her skin felt like fire beneath my fingertips, every touch sending sparks of pleasure between us. I couldn't get enough of her. It was everything I had dreamed about, and more. In those moments, I felt alive, more alive than I had in years. But deep down, I knew that crossing this line would change everything. There would be no turning back. When we finally pulled away, breathless, we stared at each other, knowing this was just the beginning. I took her hand, and she smiled at me, but the guilt began to creep in almost immediately. I couldn't deny that what we had done was wrong, yet I couldn't resist her any longer. However, at the same time, the shadow of my wife loomed larger. I couldn't shake the thought that she might already suspect something. Every time I came home, I felt her suspicious gaze on me. I didn't know how much longer I could keep hiding the truth about my feelings. The two worlds I was living in were beginning to overlap, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. I knew my internal conflict couldn't last forever. I couldn't just think about myself and what I wanted, but how could I tear myself away from Katya when she was everything I had ever dreamed of? Every day, I became more entangled in my feelings for Katya. I knew I needed something that would amplify my transformation and give me more confidence. That's when I decided it was time to buy a new car. I spent several evenings researching different models, and finally, I chose a powerful BMW. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of my new beginning, my new self. I remember the first time I got behind the wheel, my heart raced. I felt the engine roar beneath me, and it gave me strength. As I drove through town, heads turned, and that feeling made me realize I was no longer the modest office worker I had once been. Each drive was not just transportation. It was an opportunity to embrace this new chapter in my life. I wasn't just that dull husband and father anymore. I was becoming a man who knew what he wanted. With each passing day, I spent more and more time with Katya. Now, when I pulled up in my new car, she looked at me with surprise and admiration. I noticed how her eyes gleamed when she slid into the passenger seat. We would drive around the city, talking about life and our dreams, and I felt something special growing between us. One day, we took a trip to the lake. The weather was perfect, the sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh water. We parked to take in the view, and suddenly, she turned to me. There was a spark in her eyes that made my heart race. "You've changed," she said with a smile. "You've become someone different." "I just want to be better," I replied, feeling a wave of excitement rush through me. At that moment, I didn't even know if I meant I was changing for myself or for her. We moved closer, the tension building between us. Her hand brushed against mine, and in that moment, I could feel the pull between us stronger than ever. When I leaned in and kissed her, it was like a bolt of lightning. Every doubt, every fear disappeared. It was just us, lost in the moment. I couldn't believe it was happening. Her lips on mine, the intensity of the kiss. It was filled with both passion and tenderness. In that moment, nothing else mattered. My entire life, all my doubts and fears, seemed insignificant. The kiss was full of a deep desire, one we could no longer hold back. We spent the next few moments just sitting together, our breaths still heavy from the kiss, the air charged with everything left unsaid. I knew I was falling deeper for her, and there was no turning back now. This connection was no longer just about lust. It was growing into something much more powerful. But as much as I wanted to get lost in the moment, reality kept creeping in. The guilt of what I was doing weighed heavily on me. Every time I returned home, I saw the suspicion in my wife's eyes growing. I couldn't hide it much longer. My double life was becoming too much to bear, and I knew that sooner or later, something would have to give. I was on the edge of an inevitable confrontation. Every day spent with Katya pulled me deeper into my feelings for her, while the weight of the lies I told at home became unbearable. I started to notice that my wife was becoming more suspicious. She asked more questions, became more observant. It was as if she could sense that something had shifted between us, even though I hadn't said a word. One evening, after another long day at work, I came home to find her waiting for me in the kitchen. Her eyes were filled with worry, but also something sharper, suspicion. "You're late again," she said, setting down a cup of tea in front of me. "Is everything all right at work?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied. But the way her eyes lingered on me made it harder to keep up the charade. After dinner, I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Katya. I couldn't wait to text her, to hear from her. That thrill, the adrenaline of waiting for her reply, was something I had never felt before. I grabbed my phone, typing out a message. "How are you? I miss you so much." My pulse quickened as I sent it. I waited anxiously for her response, but it didn't come right away. Panic started to rise. Had something changed? Did she suspect something too? And then, finally, my phone buzzed. It was from Katya, but the message wasn't what I expected. "We need to talk. Now." A chill ran through me. I knew this wasn't going to be good. We agreed to meet at the cafe where it all started, and as I drove there, my mind raced with possibilities. What had happened? What had she found out? When I walked in, Katya was already there, sitting at our usual table. But something was different this time. Her face was serious, her eyes troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting down across from her. I could barely keep the nervousness out of my voice. Katya looked up at me, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I saw you with your wife," she said, her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "She was waiting for you outside the office the other day." I didn't know what to do. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as her words sank in. Everything inside me twisted into knots, knowing that the delicate balance I had been trying to maintain between two lives was crumbling. "It's not what you think," I started, scrambling for an excuse, but even I knew how hollow my words sounded. Katya stared at me, her expression a mixture of pain and desperation. "I don't want to be the reason for your problems," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to make a choice. I can't do this anymore." Her words echoed in my mind like a bell tolling the end of something. I could feel the noose tightening around me. I was trapped. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I knew it couldn't go on like this. The lies, the deception, everything was coming to a head. And now, Katya was demanding a decision. I didn't know how to respond. How could I choose between two lives that were tearing me apart? How could I let either of them go? But deep down, I knew the moment of reckoning was near, and there was no way to avoid it. Katya's words hung in the air like a final ultimatum. I sat there, staring at her, feeling the weight of her demands settle over me. She was right. I couldn't keep living this double life, but the thought of making a choice, of losing either her or my family, terrified me. "I can't just leave my family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's complicated. I have a son, a life I've built with her." Katya's face softened slightly, but her eyes still carried that deep sadness. "I understand, but I can't stay in this situation. You have to decide. Either it's me or her." I shook my head, unsure of what to say. Inside, my emotions were tearing me apart. I wanted Katya with a passion I hadn't felt in years, but how could I abandon my wife and child? The life we had built together wasn't something I could just walk away from. Yet, the connection I shared with Katya felt so real, so alive. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing how to break the tension. Katya's hand rested on the table between us, her fingers fidgeting nervously. I reached out and placed my hand on top of hers, feeling the warmth of her skin. It felt so right, yet so wrong at the same time. "I need time," I said finally, trying to buy myself some room to think, though I knew time was running out. I couldn't keep stringing her along, but I couldn't make a decision on the spot either. "Just give me a little more time." Katya nodded, though I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She had already waited long enough. "Okay," she whispered, "but I can't wait forever." As I left the cafe that evening, my thoughts were in turmoil. I knew that this was a decision that would change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the consequences. Katya had given me an ultimatum, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I got home, the tension in the air was palpable. My wife was sitting on the couch, her arms folded, a look of quiet suspicion on her face. She didn't say anything as I walked in, but her eyes followed me, scrutinizing my every move. I could feel the pressure building, the lies I'd been telling her eating away at me. "Where were you?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "Just had to finish up some work," I lied, avoiding her gaze. But I knew she wasn't buying it. She stood up and walked toward me, her eyes searching mine for the truth. "You've been distant lately. I feel like you're not here with us anymore. Is there something you're not telling me?" I felt the walls closing in. My heart raced, the guilt and fear pressing down on me like a weight I could no longer bear. I wanted to tell her the truth, to just come clean and get it over with. But the fear of what that would mean, the devastation it would cause, held my tongue. "There's nothing to tell," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm just stressed with work." But even as the words left my mouth, I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't convinced, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered the truth. The pressure from both sides, from Katya and my wife, was becoming unbearable. I couldn't keep lying to both of them, but I wasn't ready to face the consequences either. That night, as I lay in bed next to my wife, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my life was spinning out of control. The lies, the deception, they were all catching up to me. I was trapped in a web of my own making, and sooner or later, it was going to collapse. The days passed, but the weight of the decision I had to make only grew heavier. Every morning I woke up thinking about Katya, her face, her laughter, and how she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But every evening, I returned home to my wife and son, the life we'd built together. It all felt like a charade now, as if I were just playing the role of the dutiful husband while my heart was elsewhere. I tried to act normal, to give my wife the attention she deserved, but every interaction between us felt strained. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she studied me, searching for signs of the truth I was keeping from her. She wasn't stupid. She knew something had changed, and it was only a matter of time before she confronted me. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, she finally broke the silence. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. My stomach tightened. I had been dreading this moment. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "You've been different lately," she said, looking me straight in the eyes. "I can't ignore it anymore. Are you seeing someone else?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart started pounding, and I could feel the panic rising inside me. I opened my mouth to deny it, but no words came out. The guilt was too heavy, too suffocating. I couldn't lie to her anymore. Instead, I just sat there, staring at her, unable to speak. And in that moment, I saw the truth dawn on her. The hurt in her eyes was immediate, raw, and it cut me deeper than anything I'd ever felt. "You are," she whispered, her voice breaking. I knew it. I knew something was wrong. My chest tightened as I tried to find the words, but nothing I could say would make this any better. I felt the weight of everything I had done crashing down on me. The lies, the betrayal, the selfishness. There was no way to undo it. "It's not what you think," I finally managed to say, but it sounded hollow, even to my own ears. She pushed her chair back and stood up, her eyes brimming with tears. "How long?" she demanded. "How long has this been going on?" I couldn't look at her. The shame was too much. "A few months," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. She let out a bitter laugh, wiping away a tear. "A few months," she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "And you just kept lying to me? To our son? Did you even think about us at all?" Her words hit me hard. I had thought about them, every day in fact, but the pull I felt toward Katya had been stronger than any sense of duty or guilt. I had convinced myself that I could keep the two parts of my life separate, but now it was all falling apart. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." She shook her head, backing away from me. "Sorry isn't good enough. You've destroyed everything." She paused, her voice breaking again. "What happens now? Do you even want to be with us anymore? Or are you going to run off to her?" I didn't know what to say. My heart was still torn, split between the life I had built with my wife and son and the intense feelings I had for Katya. I couldn't imagine leaving either of them, but I knew the time had come to make a choice. As I sat there, watching my wife crumble in front of me, I realized that no matter what I did, I was going to hurt someone. There was no clean way out of this. The lies, the deception, they had all led me here. And now, I had to face the consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wife had retreated to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. The house was suffocatingly silent, except for the weight of my guilt pressing down on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pain in her face, heard her voice cracking as she demanded answers I didn't have. I felt like a coward, torn between two lives I couldn't reconcile. The next morning, the atmosphere was tense. My wife wouldn't look at me, barely speaking as she prepared our son for school. I wanted to say something, anything, to make things right, but I knew nothing could erase the damage I'd done. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the messages from Katya. There was one I hadn't answered yet. "Have you made a decision?" I felt a pang in my chest. She had been patient for too long. Katya was waiting for an answer, but I wasn't ready to give her one. I typed a reply, then hesitated, staring at the blinking cursor. How could I possibly choose? But the choice was inevitable. I left the house without saying much to my wife. Her cold silence was more painful than any argument could have been. As I drove to work, my mind swirled with guilt, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. My world was unraveling, and there was no escaping the consequences. At lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I messaged Katya, asking her to meet me. We agreed to see each other in the park, the same park where we had shared so many moments. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting on the bench where we had first kissed. As I approached her, my heart felt heavy with the weight of everything I had to tell her. I wasn't sure how she'd react, but I knew I couldn't keep her waiting any longer. "Have you made up your mind?" she asked, her voice calm but tense, as though bracing for the worst. I sat down beside her, avoiding her gaze at first. "I've been trying," I said, my voice strained. "But it's not that simple." Katya let out a sigh, crossing her arms as she looked at the ground. "It's not fair to either of us," she said softly. "I can't keep living like this, waiting for you to decide." I turned to face her, and finally, our eyes met. The sadness in her gaze was undeniable. She had been patient, but I had pushed her too far. "I know," I said, swallowing hard. "And you deserve better than this. You deserve someone who can give you everything." But my voice trailed off, and I couldn't find the right words. Katya's eyes searched mine, her brow furrowing as she realized what I was saying. "So, you're choosing them?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what to do, Katya. I love you, but I have a family. I can't just walk away from that." For a long moment, she didn't respond. I could see the hurt flickering in her eyes, and it tore me apart. She looked away, blinking rapidly as if to fight back tears. "You've been telling me you love me for months," she whispered, her voice shaking. "And now you can't choose? After everything?" The pain in her words hit me like a blow. I had been selfish, dragging her along without ever fully committing. Now it was too late to take it back. I had hurt both her and my wife, and I was left standing in the wreckage of my own decisions. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice desperate, but even I could hear how hollow it sounded. "But I don't know how to fix this." Katya shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "Maybe you can't," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe it's already too late." As she stood up to leave, I reached out, grabbing her hand. But this time, she pulled away. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly, turning her back on me. "You need to figure out what you really want. But don't come back unless you know." I watched her walk away, her figure disappearing down the path. My heart ached with the weight of what I had done, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly losing her. After Katya walked away, I sat alone on the bench for what felt like hours. The reality of what had just happened settled over me like a heavy fog. I had pushed her too far, and now I'd lost her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing everything. Her, my family, my sense of self. I drove home in silence, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me with every mile. When I arrived, my wife was sitting in the living room, her face pale and drawn. She had been crying. I could tell from the redness in her eyes and the way her shoulders slumped in defeat. The sight of her like that tore at me, and I knew it was time to come clean. There was no more running from the truth. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "I think I already know what you're going to say," she whispered, her voice brittle, as if she didn't have the strength to fight anymore. I sat down across from her, my hands trembling. "I'm sorry," I began, but she raised a hand, stopping me. "I don't need an apology," she said, her voice calm but hollow. "I need to know the truth, all of it." And so I told her everything, about Katya, about how it started, about how it had spiraled out of control. I spared no details, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I knew there could be no more lies between us. She deserved the truth, no matter how painful. As I spoke, I could see her face crumbling, the weight of my words breaking her down piece by piece. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down her face, and I felt utterly powerless. There was nothing I could do to fix this. The damage was done. "Why?" she asked through her sobs. "Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't our life enough for you?" I didn't have an answer. I had asked myself the same question countless times, and yet here I was, having destroyed everything we had built together. "It's not that you weren't enough," I said, my voice thick with regret. "I don't know why I did this. I got lost." She shook her head, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "Lost? You destroyed us. You destroyed our family." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't think I can forgive you for this." Her words hit me harder than I expected. A part of me had hoped that maybe, somehow, we could work through this. But now, seeing her like this, I realized that I had crossed a line there was no coming back from. "I don't blame you," I whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me." For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the only sound in the room her quiet sobs. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I knew it would only make things worse. This was the end. I could feel it in my bones. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked down at my hands, feeling the crushing weight of what I was about to say. "I think it's best if I leave." She didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay. She just nodded, her eyes empty, as if all the fight had drained out of her. "Maybe that's for the best," she said quietly. And with that, it was over. I packed my things in silence, the house that had once felt like home now cold and distant. As I walked out the door, the reality of my choices hit me with full force. I had lost everything: Katya, my wife, my family. And the worst part was, I had no one to blame but myself. That night, I checked into a cheap hotel, the weight of my decisions hanging over me like a storm cloud. I thought about Katya, about how things could have been different. I thought about my wife, how I had broken her trust in the most devastating way possible. I thought about my son, who I had failed as a father. And for the first time, I truly understood the depth of the mess I had made. There was no going back. All I could do now was face the wreckage and try, somehow, to move forward, even though I wasn't sure how to begin. Bye.